Her face went white when she saw me there, standing in the restaurant hall, holding the ring I had taken off minutes before entering, my hands shaking, my heart exploding in my chest as if it would jump out at any moment. The soft piano music seemed to mock me as I watched the wine glasses, the half-moon plate in front of her, the smile that had been lighting up her face just seconds ago disappear like a mirage. "It's a shame you preferred this to having our family, but I will respect your choice and I will leave your life and move on with mine," I heard my voice echo more firmly than I ever imagined I could, while my eyes filled with tears that I would not allow to fall there, in front of her, in front of him, who widened his eyes, not knowing whether to get up, apologize or hide under the table. The silence that spread through the room was more cutting than any scream, and in that instant I knew, nothing I said would change what had happened, nothing could rebuild the pieces of myself that I felt falling one by one from the moment I saw his hand resting on his, fingers intertwined as if that was where they belonged. I can still hear the sound of the fork slipping from her fingers and hitting the plate, a sharp sound that echoed like a gunshot in my chest, and I wondered how many times that gesture of intimacy between them had happened without me knowing, how many nights she said goodbye to me with a cold kiss to run into the arms of another man. The smell of cheap perfume that came from him mixed with the aroma of the main dish, a scent I had never smelled in our bed, and I realized there, motionless before the love that was once mine, that nothing I had experienced with her meant more than a closed chapter in a book that I didn't want to read again. The people around me seemed trapped in a macabre play, their gazes going back and forth between me, her and him, some with pity, others with embarrassment, all waiting for the outcome that would transform that night into a story they would never forget. She still tried to mumble something, her voice failing, her words jumbled, but everything that came out of her mouth sounded like wind, like empty promises that could no longer hold me back. "Please wait, I can explain," her voice dragged like broken glass, cutting even deeper, but I no longer wanted explanations. At that moment, I discovered that the worst part of being betrayed is not only the pain of being deceived, but the suffocating feeling of being the last to know something that all the senses in your body tried to warn you about, but that you refused to hear out of love, out of fear of losing, out of belief that the other would never be capable of destroying everything you built together. And that was exactly what I felt as I left that restaurant, each step hurting as if it were tearing my bones from my body, each breath weighing like tons of concrete on my lungs, but still walking, determined not to look back, not to give her the relief of knowing that I could forgive her. I spent days without sleeping, the scenes from that night repeating themselves like an endless nightmare, the memory of her face changing from surprise to despair, the silence in the car on the way home, the house that now seemed strange, empty, contaminated by lies. In every corner, I saw reflections of what we had been, the kitchen where we laughed while making coffee, the living room where we watched movies hugging each other, the bedroom where we promised never to leave each other. Each memory was like a sharp blade, cutting through any possibility of reconciliation. Even so, something inside me was still searching for answers. I wanted to understand what led her to prefer the illusion of a forbidden romance to the warmth of the family we had built with so much effort. Maybe it was vanity, maybe it was fear of getting old, maybe it was just the cowardice of someone who doesn't know how to fight for what they love. "I made a mistake, but I love you, I don't want to lose you." Her messages came in droves, each one more desperate than the last, and I read, deleted, read again, feeling the pain transform into something I didn't recognize, indifference. How could someone who meant so much suddenly become a stranger? How could love disappear like that, as if it had never existed? But when she knocked on my door a few days later, her face marked by dark circles and regret, I realized that I was no longer the man who had left that restaurant. I had been reborn in suffering and discovered a strength I never thought I had. I opened the door, heard her pleas, felt the sincerity in each tear that ran down her face, but inside me there was only emptiness, a deep silence that told me that nothing she said would change the destiny she had chosen. "I know I was wrong, but we need to talk, please listen to me," she cried, her hands shaking, as if each word was the last chance to turn everything around. "There's nothing more to say. You destroyed our family. Now I just need you to understand that I'm going to move on, for my children, for myself, but without you." Those were the last words that came out of my mouth before I closed the door, the sound of the latch echoing like the final point I needed to start a new chapter in my life. And in that moment, I felt liberation run through my body like a ray of light tearing through the darkness that had enveloped me since the day I discovered her betrayal. What haunted me the most, however, was what I discovered later: there was much more behind her choice than just forbidden passion. The reasons that led her to cross the line into betrayal are so deep and unexpected that they made me question whether I really knew her, if I had ever really known her. And that is where this story becomes even more surprising, because when everyone thinks the pain is over, fate reveals secrets that can completely change the understanding of what happened on that fateful night in the restaurant. After all, what could make a person risk everything for a moment of desire? And what else could there be in the shadows of this seemingly perfect marriage that no one, not even me, was able to see until the moment when everything fell apart? Welcome to the channel. Here, we never support any form of cheating. Our stories are completely fictional and serve only to show how infidelity can destroy lives, families, and dreams. Get ready to dive into a shocking narrative, full of twists and turns that will make you think. Enjoy the story and press play, because what you're about to hear will stir your emotions. Jason was always the kind of man who came home smiling, even on the toughest days. He worked as a manager at a large hardware store, and everyone in the neighborhood knew him for the attentive way he treated customers, the patience he had with his coworkers, and the kindness he showed to his neighbors. Since he was young, he believed that the greatest achievement of his life would not be his career, but his family. That's why when he met Emma, it felt like the world had stopped for a moment just for them. Emma had a bright smile and a serenity that calmed even Jason's most turbulent days. She worked as a preschool teacher and was known for her dedication and the affection she showed to the children she cared for. Together, they built a home full of laughter, framed photographs in the hallways, and memories that seemed to promise an eternity. The love between them was evident in the little things, like the notes left in the morning, the coffee made just right, the hands clasped together while watching movies on the weekends, and the words whispered at dusk, when their children were asleep and the world outside was silent. They lived in a cozy house, where every detail bore the mark of the care and love they dedicated to each other, from the curtains they chose together when they first bought something as a couple, to the toys scattered around the living room that revealed the presence of their children, Thomas and Lily, who completed the perfect picture of the family that everyone saw as an example. Emma had always been passionate about teaching, and Jason supported her in every project she brought home, even when it meant spending the evenings helping to put together teaching materials or cutting colored paper for school presentations. In everyone's eyes, they were inseparable, close friends, and completely devoted to each other. Sundays were sacred to them, reserved for picnics in the park, hikes on nearby trails, or simply lazy afternoons on the couch, when they would cuddle up with their children to watch cartoons and eat popcorn. When Thomas was born, Jason was thrilled as if the world had gained new meaning. He was proud of every little achievement his son had made, from his first steps to the first doodles he hung on the fridge like trophies. Lily arrived a few years later, bringing even more joy to the home, with her golden hair and endless curiosity that asked questions at every turn. Emma, on the other hand, seemed born to be a mother, patient, dedicated, with a sweetness that made any tantrum her children might throw disappear with a hug. Even when they were exhausted from their daily tasks, Jason and Emma found in each other the strength to smile and be thankful for everything they had built together. Their nights were filled with long conversations, laughter held back so as not to wake the children, and confessions of dreams that went beyond what they had at that moment. Jason talked about his desire to one day open his own business, perhaps a small store, where he could have more time for his family. Emma talked about her desire to write children's books, combining her passion for storytelling with her experience in the classroom. They supported each other as if each victory for one was the other's victory, each challenge was an obstacle that they both needed to overcome together. When life seemed too calm, they would come up with last-minute outings, trips to nearby cities, dinners in different places, as if their routine always needed a pinch of novelty to keep them connected. Their friends admired them, and many said they wanted to have a relationship like theirs, so full of affection, partnership, and respect. Wedding anniversaries were celebrated with special dinners at home, with the table decorated with flowers chosen by Jason, background music that Emma loved, and lit candles that brought back the atmosphere of the beginning of their relationship. On their children's birthdays, they transformed the backyard into an improvised amusement park, with colorful balloons, candy stands, children's songs and lots of games that made even the adults feel like children again. For Jason, these moments were more valuable than any material achievement, because nothing compared to the feeling of seeing Emma's eyes shine with happiness or the children running around the lawn with smiles that lit up the entire neighborhood. At night, when the guests left and the house returned to silence, Jason and Emma would look at each other with complicity, exchange soft words and thank them for another perfect day as a family. Their relationship seemed to be stormproof. When they faced financial difficulties, they joined forces and cut expenses together, discussing solutions without assigning blame. When Emma was sick for a few days, Jason went out of his way to take care of her and the children, without complaining, making soup and reading to her before bed. When Jason had a serious problem at work, Emma supported him, reminding him daily of his competence, feeding him hope that better days would come. There was a silent pact between them: no matter what happened, they would be by each other's side, because that was how they built their family, and that was how they intended to grow old. Their plans for the future included trips that they still wanted to take, such as visiting paradisiacal beaches, introducing their children to historical sites and, who knows, buying a bigger house where they could have more friends and family over on the weekends. The house they lived in was a reflection of this love: walls decorated with photos of their early travels, paintings painted by Emma, mementos from the first years of their marriage. The constant smell of fresh coffee and warm bread in the morning reminded Jason of the breakfasts they made a point of having together, even on busy days. The kitchen was the heart of the house, where they gathered to cook together, teach the children how to bake, and celebrate each small victory as a family. The front garden had roses planted by Emma and sunflowers chosen by Jason, as a symbol of the optimism that had always been the basis of their relationship. In the late afternoons, he would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, admiring the sunset next to Emma, while the children played in the yard. It was in these moments that he felt the fullness of everything he had built, believing that nothing could shake the happiness he felt with her. The family had a carefully crafted routine to ensure that everyone felt loved and safe. Emma packed the children's backpacks and packed their lunches with little notes of encouragement, and Jason took care of dropping them off at school before heading to work. At the end of the day, they would gather for dinner together, without distractions, to hear about their children's discoveries, talk about each other's day, and keep the flame of their union alive. Jason loved these moments, as he believed that the foundation of a strong home was being present and listening, and he was proud to have a partner who shared these values. When they needed some time alone, they would ask the children's grandmother to babysit the little ones and go out for dinner at romantic restaurants or do simple things like walking hand in hand around the neighborhood or watching the sunset by a nearby lake. Emma and Jason weren't perfect. They argued like any other couple, but they always found a way back to dialogue and respect. When disagreements arose, they knew how to give each other space to think and then sit down to talk calmly. They both valued loyalty and transparency, and believed that secrets had no place in a happy marriage. This mutual trust was what kept them together during times when everything seemed like it was about to fall apart, like when their car broke down in the middle of a trip and they had to sleep in a motel, or when little Thomas had to be hospitalized for a few days and they took turns so that he would never be alone in the hospital. Each challenge seemed to make them even stronger, as if the universe wanted to test the solidity of what they had built, but they responded with unwavering love and partnership. Close friends used to joke that they were made for each other, and Emma smiled, saying that she believed in destiny, because that was the only way to explain how two such different people managed to fit together so perfectly. Jason, more skeptical, said that destiny is just an excuse for those who don't try hard, because for him, happiness came from daily choices, from prioritizing family, from keeping alive the passion and friendship that had always united them. This difference in visions was never a reason for a fight, but rather another point of admiration they felt for each other. Emma liked to say that Jason made her feel safe and special, while he confessed that she was his greatest inspiration to keep going, even on the hardest days. The children, Thomas and Lily, grew up surrounded by love, learning from their parents' example the value of respect, honesty and empathy. Every hug, every word of encouragement, every bedtime story was part of building a home that was more than walls, it was a refuge of affection and complicity. Jason dreamed of teaching Thomas to drive and walking Lily down the aisle when the day came, while Emma imagined her children's future achievements and how they would be together to celebrate each one. Amidst so much affection and so many plans, their home was overflowing with life, hope and the certainty that, together, they could face any obstacle that the future threw their way. But life, with its cruel ironies and unexpected twists, often tests even the strongest bonds, and without knowing it, Jason and Emma were walking towards a moment that would forever change the story they believed they had so carefully written. While they enjoyed each sunrise believing that the love they shared was indestructible, silent forces were acting behind the scenes, weaving plots that would soon come to light and put at risk everything they had built, forcing them to face painful truths and choices they never imagined they would have to make. Emma began to seem different when things calmed down again after a turbulent period at Jason's job. He noticed that his wife was more distracted, checking her phone at odd hours and withdrawing emotionally without giving clear explanations. Their once warm conversations were now punctuated by automatic responses, lost glances and a silence that, for Jason, weighed more heavily than any shouting. Their evenings together, previously marked by long exchanges of affection and plans for the future, became short and empty, as if an invisible abyss were beginning to separate them. When he tried to get closer, Emma would say she was tired or had a headache, and Jason, believing it was just accumulated fatigue, insisted on helping, looking for ways to rekindle the flame between them. He planned simple surprises, like small dinners at home, love notes hidden in their bags and even bouquets of flowers delivered for no particular reason. But each gesture seemed to disappear into a black hole of indifference. Little by little, the children began to notice the tension. Thomas asked why his mother seemed sad, while Lily sought her father's lap more often, as if she felt that something was wrong. Jason, torn between the work that consumed his hours and the fear of losing Emma, began to observe more closely the details of her daily life, her clothes that changed subtly, her outings to meetings at odd hours, the new perfumes that did not match the style she had always had. Emma, for her part, tried hard to keep up appearances, but her heart was far away. During casual get-togethers with friends, her answers about marriage were vague and full of clichés that no longer matched the reality she was living. In moments of solitude, she found herself crying in the bathroom, while convincing herself that she needed that escape, even if temporary, to feel alive again. Jason began to suffer from insomnia, getting up several times a night to look at his wife sleeping. Sometimes he would find her awake, staring at the ceiling with an unreadable expression, but when he asked her what was bothering her, she would smile mechanically and say that everything was fine. At work, Jason became more distracted, forgetting deadlines, missing important meetings, while trying to put together the pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. His colleagues noticed his change, but he always avoided the subject, preferring not to share the pain that only grew stronger with each passing day. Emma, amidst the whirlwind of conflicting emotions, increasingly gave in to the adrenaline of the forbidden, convinced that she could hide everything from her husband. The excuses for arriving home late became more frequent. Emma said she had meetings with parents, training for new teaching methods, or meetings with colleagues. Jason, trusting her word, took on the household chores alone, picking up the children from school, preparing dinner, and putting them to bed. When she arrived, the house would be silent, and he, with a tired smile, would ask her how her day had been, receiving in return only superficial words that sounded increasingly distant. Jason tried to remind her of the good times, showing her old photos, suggesting activities they loved to do together, but Emma would change the subject, change rooms, or pretend she hadn't heard, as if each memory were a burden that prevented her from continuing the path she had secretly chosen. Weekends, once reserved for family, began to have empty spaces when Emma said she needed to go out to take care of personal things. The children asked where their mother was, and Jason made up excuses that even he himself couldn't believe, holding back tears as he realized that his family was slipping through his fingers. He began to wonder if he had failed in something, if he had stopped being the man she needed, if his dedication to work had left gaps for their love to fade away. He searched for answers in memories, mentally reliving each phase of their marriage, but he found nothing that justified the coldness that had settled into the house like an unwanted guest. The first real clue came one rainy afternoon, when Jason came home early from work to surprise Emma with a special lunch. When he got home, he found her exchanging messages with someone whose name he didn't recognize on her phone screen, a slight smile on her face, so different from the one she had been showing him for weeks. She was startled to see him and quickly hid the phone, pretending that she was talking to a classmate about a school project. Jason smiled back, but inside something broke. From that moment on, the insecurity became unbearable, and he began to doubt what he feared was impossible. From then on, every time Emma left the house, Jason felt as if the air was being knocked out of his lungs, struggling not to give in to the anguish that consumed his mind. The tension between them was growing like a silent storm, ready to explode. The children began to show signs of anxiety. Thomas, once a happy boy, began to have trouble sleeping, while Lily asked difficult questions, as if she sensed something was threatening the home she had known as safe. Jason struggled to maintain his routine, but inside him anxiety ran wild, eroding his self-confidence and tarnishing every happy memory he had shared with Emma. He found himself remembering the sparkle in her eyes the day they said, "I do," the smile that had lit up their wedding anniversaries, and he couldn't understand how they had gotten to this point. The house, once full of warmth and life, became a scene of awkward silence and careful steps so as not to provoke confrontation. The night when everything began to unravel arrived when Jason, determined to win his wife back, invited her to dinner at a restaurant that had been special to them when they first started dating. He had carefully organized every detail, called to reserve the same table where they had exchanged vows of love, ordered her favorite dish, and even selected a wine that they usually drank on special occasions. On the way to the restaurant, the silence between them was almost palpable. Jason talked about the children and plans for the future, but Emma looked away to the window, giving short answers that showed that her mind was elsewhere. When they arrived, Jason felt a twinge of hope. Perhaps, sitting at that table that held so many memories, they could find a way back to what they had once been. But fate, cruel in its precision, had other plans. As Jason adjusted her chair for her and ordered her dishes, Emma seemed anxious, checking her cell phone frequently, her eyes scanning the room as if she expected to find someone. Jason tried to ignore the uneasy feeling, but her every gesture sounded like a cry that something was terribly wrong. When the waiter brought the wine, she refused, saying she had a headache, which sounded strange, since it was her favorite drink. Jason, already with a heavy heart, tried to keep the mood light, remembering trips they had taken, funny stories about the children, but her mind seemed so far away that his words echoed in a cold void. The clock marked the passing of time cruelly, each second increasing the feeling that he was no longer welcome here. It was then that, when Emma was careless when she walked away to answer a call, Jason noticed a notification on her cell phone screen, an address, a time, and the phrase, "I can't wait to see you again." Jason's world stopped at that moment, his voice went silent, the background music seemed to disappear, and the atmosphere in the restaurant became suffocating. When Emma returned, he took a deep breath, holding back the tears that threatened to fall, and finished dinner in silence, without showing the pain that tore at every part of him. In the following days, he pretended to be normal, while inside he built a plan to find out the whole truth. He began to observe her every move, followed her on some afternoons, photographed places where she said she was and compared them with the information he was able to gather in silence, feeling like a stranger in his own life, but determined not to live in the dark. Until one night when Emma said she had a meeting out of town, Jason decided to follow her, driving with his heart racing and his stomach churning, fearing what he might find. The journey seemed endless, each kilometer driven fueling a whirlwind of emotions that ranged from fear to fury, from love to hate, from the desire to save his marriage to the urge to abandon it right there. When he finally parked the car a few meters from where she entered, Jason felt his hands tremble and cold sweat run down his forehead. The facade of the restaurant she had chosen left no doubt, it was a romantic place, perfect for secret meetings. He got out of the car and walked to the entrance, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of all their years of companionship on his shoulders. And there, through the window, he saw what he had feared so much, Emma, with a smile that she had not shown at home for a long time, holding another man's hand, their gazes exchanged intimately, as if nothing else existed around them. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion, but a stark truth that crushed Jason inside. The image of the woman he loved, laughing and touching another man, marked his soul like a scar that would never disappear. Every happy memory mixed with the pain of that vision, transforming years of dedication into fragments of a life that no longer existed. As he stood there, motionless, a few feet away, struggling not to burst into rage, a thought began to germinate in his mind: what had really driven Emma to seek another man? Was there something darker behind that betrayal? The answer seemed hidden in shadows even deeper than the pain he felt, promising to reveal secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about the woman who had once been his great love. When Emma saw Jason standing at the door of the restaurant, the blood seemed to leave her body, and the smile that had warmed her face moments before disappeared in a split second. Her lover, confused, tried to understand who the man was who appeared before them with a look as devastating as it was stormy. Jason, firm, entered with heavy steps, ignoring the looks that followed him, and stopped in front of the table where Emma, paralyzed, could not even say a word. He leaned in slightly, his voice low and sharp, releasing each word like a blade. "Do you think you could play with all our lives forever? I know everything, Emma. I know where you've been, I know who you've been with, and now you're going to tell me why." Emma began to babble, her hands shaking, her eyes watering, reflecting the pain that was beginning to settle in her chest as she realized that the castle of lies was crumbling once and for all. The restless lover intervened in a defensive tone, saying he didn't want any trouble, but Jason just ignored him, focused on the woman he believed he loved more than himself. Emma tried to compose herself, taking a deep breath, but her words came out brokenly, full of fear and shame. I didn't want it to be like this. I never wanted to hurt you," she began, but Jason interrupted, his voice louder, full of a pain that reverberated throughout the room. "So tell me, Emma, why destroy our family? Why deceive our children, our home?" Tears streamed down her face as the truth, painful and unexpected, began to emerge like a tsunami ready to sweep everything away. I felt lost, Jason, as if my life had stopped in time while yours moved on. I needed to feel that I was still wanted, that I still existed for someone. But it's not just that. She confessed, her sobs making her speech almost incomprehensible. Jason, his heart in pieces, moved even closer, as if he needed to hear every syllable to believe that all of this was real. "Is there more?" she asked, her voice cracking, her chest rising and falling in a frantic rhythm, as if each breath were a battle against despair. Emma looked down, wiping away the tears with the back of her hands, trying to find the courage to release what she had kept buried for years. "Jason, before us, before our life together, I did things I'm ashamed of. I lied to you from the beginning. Do you remember when you said you wanted children, and I said yes right away?" she said, her voice wavering as if walking on thin ice. "I remember," he replied coldly, his eyes fixed on hers as if they could pierce any facade. "I lied about an abortion I had when I was very young, long before I met you. But it wasn't just a mistake from the past. The man I lived that story with, he never completely left my life. He was the one who reappeared now, he was the one I was with. And the most terrible thing is that I knew, deep down, that if he came back, I would give in again, because part of me always belonged to him," she revealed with a tone of defeat, as if the words freed her and imprisoned her at the same time. Jason took a step back, as if he had been punched and thrown off balance. The pieces he couldn't fit together came together to form an even crueler image than he had imagined. Emma had not only betrayed his present, but she carried an entire past of lies, an emotional bond with another man that had never been broken, even through years of marriage and children. "You mean that all this time, while I thought it was just us, you shared your heart with another man?" he said, his voice shaking with the explosive mixture of indignation and pain. Emma tried to get closer, her hands outstretched as if they could recover what was shattering there, but Jason stepped back, his eyes watering with contained fury. "I didn't know how to tell you, I swear. I tried to bury that past, but when it came back, I couldn't resist, I was weak," she said between sobs, while her lover, embarrassed, looked away, fidgeting with his hands as if he no longer wanted to be part of that disaster. The silence between them was filled only by the sound of silverware and whispered conversations from the other tables, involuntary witnesses to a marriage that was imploding before their eyes. Jason, breathing as if he needed air to keep from falling, said in a firm voice, "You destroyed everything, Emma. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. And now I understand that there is nothing more I can do to save what we had. But you will have to face the consequences." Emma fell to her knees, not caring who was watching, holding his leg, begging him between sobs to give her a chance, to listen to her heart, to remember everything they had been through. "Please don't leave me, I love you, I was just confused, I need you," she begged, but each word seemed to echo in vain, because Jason no longer saw in her the woman he had known, just a stranger who had hidden the darkest part of herself for years. "Do you love me? Then why, Emma? Why keep something so important a secret, why let me build a family on a lie?" he said, his voice low, almost hoarse, but with such evident pain that anyone who heard it would understand there was no going back. Emma was crying uncontrollably, her makeup smeared, revealing a face that was a mix of regret and despair. Her lover tried to put his hand on her shoulder to calm her down, but Jason looked at him with such intensity that the man recoiled as if he had touched fire. "Get out of my way, you are not part of my life," Jason said coldly, his voice filled with such deep contempt that it seemed to eat away at the other man from within. Silence reigned again, heavy as a rock over the three of them. When Jason finally turned to leave, Emma cried out, her voice echoing through the room, "Jason, our children. What if they find out? Please don't tell them, don't destroy what's left." He paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and turned just enough for his voice to be heard clearly, "They deserve the truth. But unlike you, I will know how to tell it so they won't feel guilty for their parents' mistakes." And he left, each step sounding like the bang of a gavel sealing the fate of what had once been a close-knit family. Emma lay on the floor, crying uncontrollably, while her stunned lover paid the bill and tried to convince her to leave. But she remained there, paralyzed, realizing that in trying to reach for something she thought was missing, she had lost everything that truly mattered. Outside, the rain was beginning to fall, washing the sidewalk as if it wanted to wash away the last traces of that night. Jason got into the car without looking back, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel, his mind buzzing with thoughts about what he would tell his children, how he would rebuild his life, and if he would ever trust anyone again. His heart ached like never before, but amidst the pain, a flame of resolve was born, he would not be defined by her betrayal. Life had to go on, and he would find strength in the children he loved more than anything. But somewhere in the corner of his mind, a dark, insistent question arose: was Emma the only one hiding secrets, or was there still more to be discovered in this story he thought he knew so well? The rain was falling harder when Jason got home, the sound of the drops hitting the windshield echoing inside the car like a drum that marked the end of everything he thought he had built. He remained there, motionless, breathing deeply, trying to hold on to any shred of sanity while Emma's words reverberated in his mind like ghosts that refused to go away. For a few minutes, he remained silent, observing the dim lights of the house that, at that hour, slept in a false peace. When he finally got out of the car, his steps were heavy as if he were dragging chains attached to his feet, each movement hurt like a cruel reminder of what he had witnessed hours before. When he opened the door, he found the children's backpacks abandoned in the hallway, reminding him that there were still lives there that needed him more than ever. The familiar smell of stale coffee and the soft sound of a wall clock marked the distance between yesterday and today, between the safety he believed he had and the abyss that now opened at his feet. He walked up the stairs in silence, peering into his children's rooms, watching them sleep soundly, oblivious to the storm that was destroying the family they knew. A lump formed in his throat as he touched Thomas's hair, remembering the day he held him for the first time, and then he rested his hand on Lily's shoulder, who was hugging a stuffed animal so tightly that it seemed to be protecting herself from something she didn't yet know existed. Jason left the room with his chest burning, closing the door slowly so as not to wake them. He went down to the kitchen and sat at the table, where he found the tablet with drawings that Lily had made for her mother, colorful hearts and innocent phrases like, "I love you, Mommy." The tears, which until then had been held back like soldiers on guard, finally fell, running silently as he slid his fingers over the crooked lines and vibrant colors that reminded him that, despite everything, he needed to be strong. That same night, Emma returned home. The rain had wet her hair and left her heavy coat soaked, but she didn't seem to notice the physical discomfort, only the fear in her eyes as she opened the door. The soft sound of her slippers echoed down the empty hallway until she reached the kitchen, where Jason remained seated, his hands clasped on the table as if still seeking courage to face what was to come. Emma paused in the doorway, hesitating, and her voice broke the silence with a whisper laden with regret. "Jason." He looked up, his eyes red from crying meeting hers, and for the first time in years, there was no tenderness in that meeting. Only an abyss of hurt that seemed impossible to cross. "Don't you dare start making excuses now," he said, his voice low but firm, each word heavy with the weight of someone who had already lost everything. Emma took a few steps forward, tears beginning to flow again, but Jason stood up so abruptly that he stopped her, as if an invisible wall had risen between them. "You had your chance to tell me, but you chose the shadows. Now I just want to know how you intend to explain this to our children," he continued, his voice hardened by wounded pride and the shattered love that still insisted on throbbing in his chest. "I don't know, Jason, I just know that I need you, our family. I don't want this to end like this," she pleaded, approaching with small steps, but he raised his hand, stopping her. "Don't you understand that it's already over?" he said, his tone so cold that the silence that followed seemed louder than any scream. Tension hung in the air as the rain drummed on the roof. Jason walked past her without touching her, went upstairs, and when he returned with some suitcases, he began to pack his clothes, documents, and most important belongings. Emma fell to her knees, holding the hem of his pants, the words coming out in sobs. "Don't do this, please, I beg you." He stopped, his gaze fixed on hers with a mixture of pain and disbelief, and his voice sounded lower but more definitive than ever. "I warned you there was no going back. And now, Emma, you're going to have to live with this." The sound of suitcases being dragged down the hallway echoed like the harbinger of a home that was no longer there. When he reached the door, Jason hesitated, looked one last time at the stairs that led to his children's bedrooms, and left without another word, leaving Emma collapsed on the cold kitchen floor. He drove to the house of a longtime friend, Noah, who welcomed him with open arms even though he didn't understand what was happening. In silence, Jason threw himself on the couch, exhausted, staring at the ceiling as if searching for some answer in the void. Noah watched him, sitting next to him, and broke the silence. "If you want to talk, I'm here." Jason closed his eyes, his voice coming out as a tired whisper. "She didn't just cheat on me, Noah. She's been cheating on me since before we were married. A part of her has always belonged to another man. I never had the whole heart of the woman I loved." His friend hugged him, the shared silence saying more than any words could express. Jason fell asleep with his mind seething with memories distorted by the poison of discovery, his dreams turning into nightmares that made him wake up with startles, his face wet with tears that continued to fall even during sleep. In the following days, Emma tried to contact him in every possible way, incessant calls, guilt-ridden messages, audios begging him to come back, but Jason remained silent, focusing only on how to protect his children from that truth that would change everything for them. He met with Thomas and Lily whenever possible, picked them up from school, took them for walks, and when he saw them smiling, he felt that there was still a reason to move on. The children asked about their mother, but Jason only said that they needed some time so that everyone would feel better. Each answer destroyed him a little more inside, because he knew that he could not keep up this charade for much longer. Emma, on the other hand, sank deeper and deeper into despair. She couldn't eat or sleep. She relived the scene in the restaurant on a loop, Jason's words echoing like hammers in her mind. She tried to write letters that she started and then tore up, not knowing how to express what she felt. When she went to the children's room, she hugged their stuffed animals as if there she could find a trace of the love she had destroyed. The house, once full of life, now seemed like a silent tomb, where every object reminded her of the man she had lost and the family she didn't know if she could rebuild. One Saturday afternoon, Jason took the children to a park. They were playing in the sand while he sat on a bench, thinking about how to start over without the woman he thought would be his forever. That was when Emma appeared in the distance, her hair tied up in a mess, her face pale, her hands shaking. When she saw them, she ran to her children, kneeling down to hug them with an intensity that left them confused. "Mommy missed you, my loves," she said, her voice breaking, as tears flowed uncontrollably. Jason stood up, approaching her slowly, his eyes full of sadness, but also of determination. When Emma looked up at him, she saw in the eyes of the man she loved the certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. "Can we talk?" she asked with a choked voice, looking at him as if it were her last chance. Jason nodded, asked Thomas and Lily to go play on the slide, and led Emma to a remote corner of the park, where the trees sheltered the sound of the wind and muffled any other voices. "Why are you here?" he asked, not aggressively, but with a coldness that made Emma shiver. "I needed to see you, I needed to tell you that I'm willing to do anything to get you back, our family. I made a mistake, but I love you, Jason, I love you so much it hurts," she said, the words coming out like a rush of despair. Jason sighed deeply, running his hand through his hair, and asked the question that left her breathless: "Do you really believe that's what love is? That loving someone means lying, cheating, and choosing someone else in silence while pretending that everything is fine at home?" Emma tried to justify herself, her voice choked, saying that she was scared, that she didn't want to lose everything, but that she couldn't fight the confusing feelings that dominated her. The conversation continued intensely, with tears from both of them, silences that said more than words, and revelations of accumulated hurts that had never been exposed. Jason talked about the nights he spent awake trying to understand what he had done wrong, about how humiliated he felt for having been the last to know, and about how every smile Emma gave during those secret meetings was like a knife in his back. Emma, in turn, confessed that insecurity had been eating away at her since she became a mother, the fear of no longer being wanted, of losing her own identity, of seeing Jason move on while she felt stagnant. She also revealed that, even though she loved him, she felt attracted to someone who reminded her of who she was before she became a wife and mother, but that she now realized how selfish and destructive that search had been. When his children came running back to show him a flower they had found, Jason bent down to admire it, took a deep breath, and for the first time in days, smiled at them sincerely. He stood up, looked at Emma, and said in a firm but calm voice, "I will never hate you, because you are the mother of my children, but I will never be able to love you the same way. What you did broke something in me that I don't know if it can be fixed. I will take care of the children, I will protect them, but between us, Emma, it's over." She covered her face with her hands, crying convulsively, while Jason walked away, calling for his children to leave. At that moment, the breeze that swayed the trees seemed to whisper that life would go on, even if it carried deep scars. And although Emma stayed behind, alone on the park bench, all she could do was watch the man who had once been everything in her life walk away, taking with him the future that she herself had destroyed. As he walked back to the car with his children, Jason felt his heart heavy as if each step required a monumental effort, but at the same time, a small flame of relief began to warm his chest, a sign that, despite the pain, he had made the right decision. The children, oblivious to the gravity of what had happened, ran ahead, fighting to see who would reach the back seat first, and for a moment, Jason allowed himself to smile as he saw their faces illuminated by the purity that only childhood can keep intact even when the adult world falls apart. During the drive back, the silence was only interrupted by the excited voices of Thomas and Lily telling about the adventures they had imagined while playing, each of their words acting as an anchor that kept him firm in the conviction that he needed to start over, not for him, but for them, so that they would have the chance to grow up in a home that, although fragmented, was full of love and security. That night, while the children slept soundly in Noah's makeshift bedroom, Jason sat in the armchair by the window, watching the distant lights and listening to the soft sounds of the night. His mind was a storm of thoughts, but amidst the turmoil, a dilemma began to emerge that he could not ignore, whether or not to tell his children the whole truth. He knew that honesty had always been a non-negotiable pillar in his life, but he also feared that exposing his mother's betrayal would destroy the image they had of her, staining their childhood memories with a pain they might never overcome. At the same time, hiding everything meant living with the weight of the lie, a bitter irony for someone who had just been destroyed by secrets. Noah, always present in silence, sat beside him and said that any choice would bring pain, but that he had to choose the one that would best preserve the children's hearts, even if it meant swallowing his own anguish for many years. The next few days were marked by a carefully constructed routine so that Thomas and Lily would maintain some sense of normalcy. Jason would wake up early, make them breakfast with pancakes shaped like stars and hearts, take them to school and pick them up on time, and on the weekends, he would come up with plans to keep them busy and happy. Little by little, the questions about their mother's absence began to come up more frequently and more deeply. Jason always answered calmly, saying that adults sometimes needed time to work out problems, but that they would never be left behind. These answers temporarily calmed the little ones, but each question was a painful reminder that the illusion of a close-knit family was falling apart. Emma, in turn, oscillated between desperate attempts to reconnect with Jason and moments when she completely isolated herself, without the strength to face the shame that consumed her. On the days when she was able to see the children, Jason supervised their meetings closely, ensuring that no comments were made that could hurt their innocence. Each goodbye was a painful ritual. Emma hugged her children with an almost suffocating intensity, and Jason had to contain his own emotions so as not to allow his sadness to show and turn those moments into traumatic scenes. At night, in his temporary bed, he wondered if he would ever be able to look at Emma without feeling repulsed, or if he could ever love her again in some way, but he always came to the same conclusion: there was no longer room for them as a couple. Jason and Emma's conversations became inevitable as they discussed practical matters like childcare shifts, special dates, and school decisions. Each exchange was filled with restrained tension, with measured words and looks that sometimes revealed a longing for what they had been, but were quickly erased by the memory of what they had become. In one such conversation, Emma suggested that they try couples therapy in the hope of rebuilding something from the rubble, but Jason was adamant that he saw no future for them together, that he couldn't imagine sharing his life with someone who had chosen to lie to him again. Her words of regret sounded sincere, but for him, sincerity came too late, like useless medicine when the wound has already festered. As he struggled to maintain his composure, Jason also faced silent judgments from people close to him who, without knowing the details, speculated about the reason for the couple's separation. Some mutual friends looked at him suspiciously, others approached him with forced smiles and invasive questions that he avoided answering, but what bothered him most was the feeling that, in some glances, there was a suggestion that he might have been responsible for the end of the marriage. In casual encounters at school, Emma tried to smile to keep up appearances, but the awkwardness was palpable, and conversations with other mothers became mechanical, devoid of any lightness that had previously existed. The small details that had previously gone unnoticed, such as a touch on the arm during a conversation or a lingering gaze, were now analyzed in every gesture, turning each interaction into an uncomfortable dance of appearances. One Sunday afternoon, while walking with the kids in a different park, Jason ran into an old school friend, Sophie, who was warm and empathetic when she noticed the dejection on his face. They talked for hours while Thomas and Lily ran along the trails, and for the first time in a long time, Jason felt heard without judgment, without questions loaded with intentions or veiled accusations. Sophie shared her own story of overcoming a troubled relationship, and in that encounter, a friendship was born that began to illuminate the darkest corners that Jason carried inside. In the following weeks, they began to exchange messages and meet casually, creating a bond that awakened in Jason the memory of how good it was to talk without fear, to laugh without burden, to dream without resentment. Meanwhile, Emma, increasingly aware that reconciliation seemed impossible, entered a spiral of reflections on who she had become and how she had allowed her insecurities and fears to lead her to make decisions that cost her everything she loved most. On a silent night, alone at home, she wrote a long letter to Jason, admitting all her mistakes, sincerely apologizing, but also promising that she would never put her children in the middle of adult problems, stating that she would always respect his decision and do whatever it took so that Thomas and Lily could continue to grow up in peace. When she finished, tears soaked the paper, but inside her, there was a small spark of relief, because even if she did not erase her mistakes, at least she felt ready to face the consequences of her choices. This period also taught Jason a bitter lesson: no matter how much he wanted to protect his children from all the pain, he couldn't do it completely. They began to notice the changes, they felt their mother's absence at some important moments and they saw their father more serious, less willing to play. He then decided to talk to Thomas, who, being older, was already showing signs of anxiety and restlessness. One late afternoon, sitting on the bench in Noah's backyard, Jason explained that sometimes people who love each other can make mistakes and get hurt, but that this did not diminish the love he and his mother felt for them. Thomas listened in silence, the words weighing more heavily than Jason would have liked, but in the end the boy just hugged him tightly, as if he understood that, even in the midst of chaos, there was still a safe haven. The days went by with their comings and goings, with smiles that hid their pain and silences that said more than any words. Emma remained present as a mother, doing everything she could to participate in her children's routines, while Jason, despite his broken heart, recognized that she was still essential in their lives. This recognition, however, did not mean reconciliation. Every time he saw her, he remembered the emptiness in her eyes during their secret meetings, the touch that was no longer his, the lies that corrupted everything they had built. The moral dilemma followed him like a shadow: protect his children at any cost or give them the truth so they would not live in a fantasy. Each answer led him to new questions, and each day he discovered that rebuilding a shattered life was not just about forgiveness or resentment, but about the courage to decide what to do with the scars. In the midst of all this, Sophie became a constant part of his routine, first as a friend, then as someone who awakened in Jason a hope he thought he had lost. They met to walk, talk about books they liked, laugh about memories from the past, and slowly, Jason felt that a new chapter could emerge, a chapter that would not erase what he had experienced with Emma, but that showed that life could begin again. Sophie, sensitive to his situation, never forced anything, offering only support, understanding and respect for the limits that Jason set, and this kindness made him feel safe in a way that he had not felt in a long time. The wind on spring nights brought with it a freshness that seemed to announce that changes were approaching. Jason would often stand on the porch, watching the starry sky while listening to his children breathing in their rooms, feeling grateful to still have them by his side. Memories of happy times with Emma would emerge unexpectedly, and instead of repulsion, they would begin to awaken a bittersweet feeling, the certainty that even stories that end in tragedy can carry chapters of genuine love. It was this thought that drove him to move forward, not to erase the past, but to transform it into learning. And so, as the moon shone overhead, Jason knew that the end had not yet come, but that each decision from then on would be made with more awareness, more care and more hope that, even after the most painful of falls, it would still be possible to learn to fly again. In the weeks that followed, Jason and Emma's contact became a minefield where every word had to be carefully chosen so as not to provoke emotional outbursts that could spill over onto the children. They exchanged short, to-the-point messages, arranging visiting times and deciding on details of Thomas and Lily's school day. There were times when Emma's voice on the phone sounded shaky, as if each syllable was a disguised plea for forgiveness, but Jason maintained his composure, knowing that, even though there were still traces of affection, the love that had once united them had transformed into something irreparably different. The routine began to find a rhythm, albeit an uncomfortable one. Jason would pick up the children to spend alternate days with them, while Emma tried to rebuild her relationship with her children, showering them with gifts and special programs in an attempt to make up for her recent absence. But despite her efforts, the children showed more restrained affection, especially Thomas, who began to avoid long hugs and answer her questions in monosyllabic terms, a reflection of the confusion he felt without understanding exactly what had changed in the family. One Saturday, as he waited for Emma to pick up the children, Jason carefully packed their backpacks. The sound of her car pulling up was a signal for his heart to race, even as he forced himself to remain calm. When Emma appeared at the door, dressed simply, her face drawn and without makeup, Jason could tell she was as emotionally exhausted as he was. Thomas and Lily ran to her, but only Lily hugged her with her usual excitement. Thomas stayed a few steps behind, staring at the ground. Emma called to him softly, but the boy just shook his head. Jason intervened, pulling Thomas aside and kneeling in front of him. "Son, Mommy loves you very much, you know that, don't you?" Thomas hesitated, bit his lip, and then, in a barely audible whisper, said, "I know, but I don't understand why you two don't spend more time together." Jason's gaze met Emma's, and for a second they both shared the same fear: how to explain to a child something that even they couldn't fully process. Emma walked over and crouched down beside Jason, holding out her hand to her son, who reluctantly took it. "Thomas, my love, sometimes even when two people love each other, they can't be together anymore, but that doesn't change how much we love you," she said, her voice breaking, tears escaping despite her efforts to keep it together. Jason finished, gripping his son's shoulder. "You and your sister are the most important thing we have, and nothing that happened between me and your mother will change that." Thomas nodded, but the weight of uncertainty still hung in his eyes, a shadow that Jason knew would take time to dissipate. As Emma loaded the kids into the car, Jason walked over to her, stopping by the open door. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to Lily hum in the back seat, completely oblivious to the tension that filled the air. Emma took a deep breath and, for the first time in days, looked straight at Jason. "I know I can't ask you for anything, but, can you tell me if you'll ever be able to forgive me?" she asked in a voice so low it could have been mistaken for the wind blowing through the yard. Jason held her gaze, pain throbbing in his temples, and answered with brutal honesty: "Forgiveness is something that can happen in time, but trusting again is another story. And Emma, I don't know if I'll ever be able to." The words hung between them like a sentence, and then Emma just nodded, swallowing hard before getting into the car and driving away with the kids. That night, Jason went to the lake near Noah's house. The moon's reflection on the water swayed in the wind, creating a setting that at another time would have seemed perfect for relaxing, but now seemed to mock him. He remembered the nights he had spent there with Emma when they were first dating, when they would hold hands and talk about the future they wanted to build together, about the children they dreamed of having, about the trips they planned. All of that now seemed so distant that it physically hurt. The sound of frogs in the distance and the soft chirping of crickets mixed with the thoughts that raced through his mind. He repeatedly questioned whether he could have done something differently to avoid what had happened, but deep down he knew that the decision to cheat would always be hers alone, and no matter how many times he asked himself, "What if?" the answer would not change. A few days later, Jason took Thomas and Lily out for lunch and ran into Sophie by chance at the same restaurant. She walked up, greeted the children warmly, and asked if she could sit with them. Jason hesitated for a second, but Thomas, who had taken a liking to Sophie since their first meeting, pulled her into a chair with a smile that warmed his father's heart. During lunch, conversation flowed naturally, with shy laughter, funny stories from the children, and an atmosphere so light that, for a few moments, Jason forgot the pain he was carrying. When Sophie said goodbye, Thomas asked if they could see her again, and Jason promised, feeling surprised at his own willingness to let someone new into his family. That night, when he put Lily to bed, she hugged him tightly and asked, in a sleepy voice, if he was happy. The simple question disarmed him, and he held her hand for a few seconds before answering, "Daddy is trying, my princess. I'm trying very hard." He kissed her on the forehead and left the room with a heavy heart, but for the first time in a long time, he also felt a spark of hope, as if life could still have good things in store, even after so much destruction. The night was progressing when his phone rang with Emma's name lighting up the screen. He answered it with his heart racing, but her voice, tired and almost cold, surprised him. "Jason, I need you to know that I'm thinking about accepting a job in another city. It would be a way to start over, far away from here. But I'll only decide if you agree, because I don't want to take the children away from you," she said, her voice full of a mix of resignation and sadness. The news caught him off guard, because despite everything, he never imagined that Emma would actually leave town. The silence on the other end of the line stretched until Jason took a deep breath and replied, "Emma, that's your decision, but if you leave, we need to talk about how we're going to divide our time with the kids. They need stability, not more drastic changes." Emma nodded, her voice choked, and before hanging up, she said quietly, "Thank you for still thinking about them, even after everything. You were always better than I deserved." Jason hung up feeling exhausted, but at the same time relieved to see that she was beginning to accept responsibility for her choices. The next morning, he took the children to school and, on the way back, he passed places that were part of the history he had shared with Emma, the bakery where they bought fresh bread on Sundays, the cinema where they had seen their first film together, the square where they had their first kiss. Each memory hit him like a blow, but it also served to strengthen his conviction that he had to move on, because living trapped in pain would be a prison for him and the children. When he got home, he found a message from Sophie, inviting him for coffee that afternoon. It took him a few minutes to respond, considering whether he was ready to allow himself to move on, but the image of his children's smiles with Sophie gave him courage, and he accepted the invitation, feeling that the decision could mean the beginning of something new. While they were having coffee in a quiet place, Jason told Sophie part of what had happened, without going into details that were still difficult to verbalize. Sophie listened attentively, holding his hand silently when words failed her, and when she finally spoke, she simply said, "You are an incredible man, Jason. Don't let what happened make you doubt that." Her words, simple and sincere, touched something deep inside him, and he allowed himself to smile, feeling welcomed. Returning home after the meeting, Jason realized that for the first time in a long time, the longing for what he had lost was not accompanied only by pain, but also by gratitude for the good times they had shared and for the courage he had found to start over. That night, while the children slept, Jason went to Thomas's room, adjusted the covers and watched his son sleep peacefully, reflecting on how the choices adults make leave a lasting mark on their hearts. He silently promised himself that he would do everything he could to make sure they grew up knowing that they were loved and that, even when the world seemed to be falling apart, there would always be room to rebuild. The night went on in silence, and as he lay down, Jason felt the weight on his chest begin to ease, as if he could finally breathe a little deeper. He didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but he was determined to face it with courage, because he understood that true love, the one that really matters, is not the one that makes us suffer, but the one that makes us want to be better, even after it has been broken. Time passed like a river that, despite its turbulent flow, never ceases, and with it came changes that no one could have foreseen. Emma, after much reflection and long conversations with Jason, decided to accept the job offer in another city, not as an escape, but as an opportunity to rebuild herself away from the weight of the mistakes she had made. In the days leading up to her departure, she dedicated herself to spending every possible moment with Thomas and Lily, taking them on special outings, telling stories about their childhood and trying to engrave in their hearts how much she loved them, even though she knew that the memories of the good times would not be enough to erase the scars that her choices had left. When the day of the move arrived, she said goodbye to Jason with a restrained hug, both aware that that gesture carried more than words could ever express. He wished her strength, but made it clear that his priority would always be to protect the children. When he saw her leave, he felt relief mixed with sadness, because, despite all the suffering, part of him still regretted what could have been. Thomas, older and more sensitive, took some time to accept the new routine, often asking why his mother didn't live closer, but Jason, faithful to his promise to preserve the purity of his son's heart, always found ways to gently explain that sometimes people need to follow different paths to find peace. Lily, younger and more innocent, adapted more easily, contenting herself with knowing that even though she was far away, her mother called every day to ask about her drawings and tell her bedtime stories. The inevitable longing was softened by Jason's constant love, who went out of his way to be not only a father, but also a friend, counselor, and safe haven in every storm that arose in children's hearts. Every laugh that echoed through the house, every night of improvised movies, every morning of shared coffee reinforced in Jason the certainty that, despite all the wounds, he was building a more solid future for his children. Meanwhile, Sophie and Jason were deepening a connection that, born from casual conversations, blossomed into something unexpected. With her, Jason found a welcoming space where he could be vulnerable without fear, where laughter came easily and silences were comfortable, not fraught with mistrust. Sophie, in turn, admired his dedication as a father and the way he remained generous and willing to start over even when hurt. Their meetings went from quick coffees to walks with the children, who adored her more and more. Mutual respect and patience in not rushing feelings were the foundation of a relationship that, little by little, gave Jason back hope that it was possible to love and be loved again, without having to carry the burden of the past. One summer afternoon, as they watched Thomas and Lily play in the shallow water of a lake, Jason held Sophie's hand, realizing that the warmth he felt came not just from the sun, but from the comfort she brought to his life. Emma, for her part, faced a lonely journey of self-discovery in her new city. In the first few months, she felt overwhelmed by guilt, by memories that insisted on haunting her in her quiet moments. She cried night after night, reliving every detail of what she had destroyed, and sought solace in therapy, where, for the first time, she allowed herself to speak openly about the feelings of inadequacy that had haunted her since she was young. The distance from Jason and the children forced her to look at herself like never before, to confront the fears that had led her to make such destructive choices. Over time, she began to find some peace, dedicating herself to work with the passion she had always had for teaching, and volunteering in social projects to bring reading to underprivileged children, in the hope that by spreading kindness she could, in some way, repair the harm she had caused her own family. As the months passed, Thomas and Lily learned to live in a new balance. Weekly video calls with their mother became part of their routine, as did the trips they took to visit her during the holidays. Jason, with Sophie by his side, made sure that the meetings happened in a healthy way, maintaining the commitment that his children would have strong bonds with both parents, even though the family no longer existed as it once did. Each time they returned home, Thomas seemed more mature, slowly understanding that life is made of choices and that they are not always fair, while Lily, with her contagious joy, reminded everyone that even in the midst of pain, lightness can still exist. Jason saw in his children's eyes the resilience he hoped to cultivate, the ability to move forward without getting lost in the shadows of what has passed. One night, after putting the children to bed, Jason and Sophie sat on the porch, lit only by the soft glow of the moon. He talked about the fear he still felt, the distrust that occasionally arose as a reflection of the betrayal he suffered, but also about how she managed to make him feel whole again. Sophie, holding his hand, said softly, "I can't promise that I'll never make mistakes, but I can promise that I'll always talk, always be honest, because you deserve that." Her words moved him more than he would like to admit, and for the first time, he felt that he could finally let his guard down without fear of being destroyed again. The kiss they shared that night was not only passionate, but full of hope, marking the beginning of a new story that he never imagined would be possible. In the years that followed, Emma continued to struggle with the consequences of her choices, but found strength in her work and in the love that still existed in her children's eyes, even from a distance. Jason built a new family with Sophie, where he learned that trust can be restored when accompanied by mutual respect and sincere dialogue. Thomas grew up understanding that life, despite its unpredictable circumstances, can be rebuilt with courage, and Lily kept her smile as proof that, despite everything, it is still possible to find happiness even when the path is full of rocks. And so, each of the characters who once shared the same home moved on in different ways, but all forever marked by the certainty that choices have consequences, and that the truth, even if painful, is always the first step towards any healing. This story shows us, in a painful but necessary way, how betrayal not only destroys relationships, but also erodes dreams, shakes trust and leaves a lasting mark on even the most innocent. It shows that loving someone is, above all, choosing to act with respect and honesty every day, because when these choices fail, no feeling can survive unscathed. May it serve as a warning to always think about the consequences of our actions, because love, when left untreated, can turn into the cruelest of pains. And remember, our channel does not support any type of betrayal. Our stories are fictional and created to show how infidelity can destroy homes and entire lives. Now, we want to know, what did you think of this story? Comment below with your opinion and share what you would do if you were in Jason or Emma's shoes. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more impactful stories like this one, which make us reflect on the paths we choose and the marks we leave on the hearts of those we love most.